Good morning. We're here at the Prairie du Chien Historical Society's site of Fort Crawford and the Museum of Prairie du Chien. And this year we're very happy to have a master gardener with us who is redoing beds, and she's going to be telling about the flower beds and her plans for them. So I'd like to introduce Cheryl Frazier, and she's going to be telling you what her plans are.
Thank you. As introduced, my name is Cheryl Frazier. I'm with the Crawford County Master Gardener Group. Several of the Master Gardeners work on the gardens throughout Fort Crawford area. Our newest garden here is what's going to be the historical gardens. This is along the east side of the museum. We also have another one on the east side of the gift shop. These plants represent those plants that would have been used by the population that was here at the time during the first half of the 19th century. This was a very, during the operation of the fort, of course, this was a very diverse population. This would have been a combination of the voyagers and the indigenous tribes, American settlers who had moved west from the East Coast, as well as new immigrants that were coming in. They all contributed to the types of plants that you'll find in these gardens. The types of plants that would have come in from the indigenous population would have been native plants such as blue flag, mullein, and goldenrod. These were either used as food or medicinal, and also the Three Sisters method of growing corn, beans, and squash at that time. The American population, American settlers that were coming in from the East Coast would have brought with them what would have been old world plants that were originally brought into the country. This would be things like candy tuft, asters, and snapdragons, though there was one particular plant that made a very long trip. Amaranth is a grain plant that was originally discovered by the Spaniards in Central and South America. It was brought back to Europe in the 16th century, made its way through Europe up into where the settlers came into North America. The first wave of settlers brought it with them, and then it spread through North America. So it took the long way around to get here. The immigrants that were coming in, that would be, the Irish, the Germans, brought with them their favorite plants as well. Cabbage was a very favorite plant because it provided them winter vegetables. You could either pickle the cabbage and make it into coleslaw, as we know today, or it could be buried in mounds or put into their some kind of storage for the winter time, so they would have a vegetable throughout winter. These people also brought things like thyme and lavender and nasturtiums, which surprisingly, yes, are edible. The plants that were brought here had to serve multi-purposes. These weren't just pretty faces as far as flowers were concerned. There was no room on the wagons for something that didn't serve another purpose other than just something to look at. So the types of plants that came in here were either used for food or they were used for medicine, and possibly also as dyes and aromatics. Now, this is our first year in putting these gardens in. As you can see, they're a little sparse right now, but we're putting in perennials, which will eventually fill in. We've also added a number of annual plants that are also like the zinnias and the snapdragons, which are also the types of plants that would have been used by the population during the first half of the 19th century. Later on in the fall, we'll be adding more perennials in here, and as these all fill in, we will still have some of these annuals, but not quite as abundant as we have them right now. The plants in this strip here are basically shade plants. They'll do well with some sun. Of course, we're having a little bit too much sun this time of year in Wisconsin, but they grow better in the shade area. There's two plants here, though, I'm sure you'll recognize as garden phlox. These were here originally. They will be moved up to the rock garden, so they'll have a new home here, and we'll replace those two plants with Solomon seal and lamb's ears, which are actually medicinal plants that were used during that period of time. Echinacea, I'm sure everyone recognizes. We also have an assortment of thymes in here. Now this one, I'm sure everyone knows, this is Canadian goldenrod, which is a medicinal plant. So we just left it here. It grew here naturally as a weed, and I spend most of my time ripping it out of my garden. But we left this one here as an example of one of the native plants that was in use at the time. So nasturtiums, of course, are coming in. More echinacea. And we have down here a jack of the pulpit. And on the end here, we have Canadian ginger. So there's a large number of native plants in here that we decided to keep. We actually transplanted the Canadian ginger and the jack of the pulpit. So we've been very fortunate in being able to access a number of the native plants from amongst the Master Gardener group. We will also be adding signage, which will let you know the type of plant and some basic information. And there'll be a notebook up in the gift house which will give more detailed information on each of the types of plants, such as their origin, their usage, and their growing habits if you feel inclined to add one to your own garden. So we invite you, when you're visiting Fort Crawford, to please come see our gardens, and if we're out here working, feel free to stop and ask us questions. We love to ask people who ask questions, and we're more than happy to share our information. So on that note, I thank you, and hopefully you'll come see us soon.